It was a beautiful morning in May 2019 in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. An atmosphere of jubilation permeated the air, especially at Boston College, where thousands of students were eagerly awaiting the most significant moment of their lives, the graduation ceremony. Parents from all over arrived, carrying pride and fresh bouquets of flowers. Amidst that crowd was a Filipino couple, their eyes sparkling with immense joy. They had come to witness their son, Alexander Urtula, step onto the podium of glory. But they did not know that instead of applause and congratulations, what awaited them was a heart-wrenching tragedy, a pain that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. With less than 90 minutes remaining before the ceremony was to begin, at a desolate, multi-story parking garage in the Roxbury district, not far from the campus, a solitary figure stood teetering on the edge of the abyss. It was Alexander. The wind whipped through the young man's hair, but his face was utterly void of expression, his vacant eyes staring down at the stretching asphalt road below. No one knew what he was thinking in that moment. Without a final word, without a hint of hesitation, he cast himself into the void. A sickening, dry thud rang out, tearing apart the peace of the morning. Pedestrians screamed in horror, cars slammed on their brakes, and bright red blood began to stain the cold pavement. News of Alexander Urtula's death spread as quickly as a violent storm. Police cordoned off the scene. The sound of sirens wailed through the streets. When the victim's identity was confirmed, all of Boston College sank into shock. Alexander was not an ordinary student. He was a true star, intelligent, talented, and the pride of the biology department. Why would a 22-year-old man with a brilliant future awaiting him choose death right at the threshold of glory? Why today of all days, while his parents sat in the stands waiting for his name to be called? The death was too irrational, too sudden, causing investigators to immediately sense that there was something sinister behind this bloody scene. To understand the root of the matter, let us turn back time and find out who Alexander Urtula was. Born into a well-educated immigrant family, Alexander was raised from childhood to be a perfect model. He was the kind of person any parent would dream of, academically gifted, obedient, and always striving his hardest. He was admitted to Boston College, participated in research at a hospital in New York, and was always the center of admiration. In the eyes of friends, Alexander was a cheerful guy who smiled often and always brought positive energy. No one saw the darkness gnawing at his soul. That perfect mask concealed deep, gaping cracks within, wounds that were bleeding out without anyone knowing. Alexander's life would have likely continued to flow peacefully had he not met Inyoung You. This Korean-American girl was also a student at Boston College, 1 year his junior. They met through a student organization and were quickly attracted to each other. Inyoung You, with her sharp appearance, independence, and a hint of coldness, seemed to be the perfect puzzle piece for the gentle Alexander. They began dating, and in the eyes of outsiders, they were an enviable, talented, and beautiful couple. The affectionate photos on social media, the holding of hands on campus, all painted a pink picture of love. But no one suspected that behind that glamorous shell was a living hell. The relationship began to show signs of abnormality after a few months. Inyoung You was not a normal girlfriend. She possessed a possessiveness and desire for control that bordered on pathological. It started with small things like checking his phone, interrogating his schedule, and baseless jealousy. But the peak of the conflict came when Inyoung discovered that Alexander still maintained social contact with an ex-girlfriend. Although they were just normal messages checking in, to Inyoung, it was an unforgivable betrayal. From that moment on, she turned Alexander's life into a prison without bars, where he had to endure mental torture every single day. Inyoung's control escalated to a suffocating level. She forced Alexander to install a tracking app on his phone so she could monitor him 24/7. Whenever Alexander went anywhere or did anything, he had to report it. If he replied to a message a minute late, Inyoung would fly into a rage. She forbade him from meeting friends, banned him from communicating with the opposite sex, gradually isolating him from the surrounding world. Alexander, from a lively young man, gradually became withdrawn, sullen, and always in a state of anxiety and fear. He was like a puppet being pulled by strings, and the puppeteer was none other than the girl he loved most. Returning to the crime scene, the police began collecting evidence. Alexander's phone was found at the scene, and it was the key that unlocked a door to a terrifying secret. When technical experts recovered the data, they shuddered at what they found. Throughout their 18-month relationship, the couple had sent each other over 75,000 text messages, a massive number, averaging hundreds of messages a day. But the horror lay not in the quantity, but in the content. The messages were not words of love, but sharp, poison-dipped knives, killing the young man's soul bit by bit. The deeper the police dug into the pile of messages, the more naked and brutal the truth became. Inyoung You continuously used abusive and humiliating language to attack Alexander's self-esteem. She called him a loser, useless, trash. She manipulated his psychology by threatening suicide if he didn't do as she wished. This is a terrifying psychological trick known as gaslighting, causing the victim to gradually doubt themselves, feeling guilty and responsible for all the abuser's emotions. Alexander had been completely brainwashed, believing he was truly terrible and deserved punishment, just as his girlfriend said. The final 2 months before Alexander committed suicide were the most hellish period. The frequency of the attack messages increased dizzily. Inyoung You did not stop at cursing. She began to incite Alexander to commit suicide. Hundreds of times, she texted sentences like, "Why don't you just die? The world would be better off without you. Go kill yourself and set me free." Those cold words appeared constantly on Alexander's phone screen, day and night. It was like a command, a relentless suggestion, cornering the young man into a dead end with no escape other than death. The most frightening part was Alexander's reaction. Instead of resisting or running away, he begged for forgiveness. He texted back painful replies like, "I'm sorry, I'll do whatever you want, I'll disappear so you can be happy." He had completely lost the will to survive, lost his ego. He had become a slave to Inyoung's emotions. In the journal he left behind, Alexander wrote of the extreme suffering of being trampled upon by his lover, yet he could not break away. That is the irony and tragedy of victims of psychological abuse. They are both afraid of and dependent on their abuser. On the fateful morning of May 20th, graduation day, Inyoung Yu's cruelty reached its peak. Phone location data showed that Inyoung had tracked Alexander's every step as he went to the parking garage. She knew exactly where he was, and she knew exactly what he intended to do. In those final moments, Alexander's phone continued to vibrate. They were not messages trying to stop him, but a terrifying silence or implicit pressure. When Alexander stood on the ledge, he was completely alone. His family was waiting at the stadium, but his mind was imprisoned in the jail Inyoung had built. A shocking detail revealed during the investigation was that Inyoung You was present at the scene. Location data showed she had gone to that parking garage at the exact moment Alexander jumped. She was there. She witnessed it all. But she did not call 911. She did not scream for help. She did not run to pull him back. She just stood there, coldly watching her lover fall. After the incident occurred, she even texted Alexander's brother pretending to be worried, as if she knew nothing. The cold-blooded nature of this young girl made even the most seasoned investigators shudder. Alexander Urtula's death was concluded as suicide, but to the prosecutors, this was a murder without a knife. They decided to charge Inyoung You. However, this case faced a major obstacle. Inyoung had quickly fled. Immediately after Alexander's funeral, she quietly withdrew from school and flew back to South Korea. She thought she could escape the net of the law by hiding on the other side of the hemisphere, but she was mistaken. Justice may arrive late, but it never overlooks a crime. A transnational legal battle began to erupt. The Suffolk County District Attorney's Office in Massachusetts made a bold decision to indict Inyoung You on the charge of involuntary manslaughter. This was a serious accusation based on the precedent of the famous Michelle Carter case, the case where a girl urged her boyfriend to commit suicide via text. Prosecutors argued that Inyoung's messages and controlling behavior were the direct cause of Alexander's death. Words can kill, and in this case, the smartphone became the most vicious murder weapon. An international arrest warrant was issued, putting pressure on Inyoung to return to the U.S. to face charges. Public opinion in the U.S. was in an uproar. People were shocked by the cruelty of a girl with such an intellectual appearance. Inyoung's messages were published in the media, causing a fierce wave of outrage. People called her a demon, a cold-blooded killer. The pressure from the public and diplomatic agencies grew larger. Inyoung You, despite being in Korea, could not live in peace. She understood that she could not hide forever. Finally, after months of standoff, Inyoung You decided to return to Boston to face trial, where thousands of eyes were waiting to see how she would defend her crime. The trial took place in an atmosphere of extreme tension. Inyoung You appeared with a haggard face, keeping her head down to avoid the reporters' cameras. Her defense lawyers tried to turn the tide. They argued that Alexander had a history of depression beforehand, and his death was of his own free will, not forced by Inyoung. They also released messages showing Inyoung had tried to stop Alexander from committing suicide on previous occasions. They wanted to build an image of Inyoung as a girlfriend helpless before a lover with psychological issues, not a murderer. However, the prosecution fiercely refuted every defense. They presented a series of undeniable evidence before the court. They projected the most vicious messages onto the big screen, such as, "Go die, the world doesn't need you." They pointed out that Inyoung had controlled Alexander to the point where he no longer had the right to self-determination. They emphasized the event of graduation day. Inyoung knew exactly where Alexander was, knew exactly what he intended to do, but made no move to save him. Her silence and apathy at the scene were the clearest evidence that she wanted Alexander dead. That was not helplessness. That was complicity. That was pushing him to the very end. The Urtula family sat in the front row, tears welling in their eyes. They had to listen again to every painful detail about the final days of their son's life. They were in agony, realizing that while they thought their son was happy, he was living in hell. The mother could not hold back choked sobs as she heard the lawyer read the messages where Alexander begged for love from the person killing him. The entire courtroom fell silent with emotion and indignation. No one could imagine a human being could be so cruel to the person they loved to that extent. The sentence of conscience had been passed, but what about the sentence of the law? The battle of wits between the prosecution and the defense was intense. This case was not merely trying an individual. It posed a major question for the legal system. How do you define the crime of encouraging suicide in the digital age? Where is the boundary between malicious words and the act of murder? If Inyoung You were acquitted, it would set a dangerous precedent. But if she were convicted, would it violate freedom of speech? The case became the center of debate for legal experts and psychologists across America. Unexpectedly, just before the trial reached a final verdict, a plea deal was reached. Inyoung You agreed to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter in exchange for a lighter sentence. She admitted that her actions and words contributed to causing Alexander's death. In court, Inyoung stood up, her voice trembling as she apologized, but many believed those were just crocodile tears seeking leniency. Regardless, this guilty plea was an official confirmation. Psychological abuse is a crime, and words can truly kill. Inyoung You was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, but with a suspended sentence of 10 years. This meant she would not have to sit in jail for a single day if she complied with probation conditions for the next 10 years. Additionally, she had to perform 300 hours of community service and undergo mandatory psychological treatment. This sentence immediately caused much controversy. Many felt it was too light compared to a lost human life. A promising young man was dead, a family was shattered, while the perpetrator of the crime was still free to walk in society. However, Alexander's family accepted this sentence. For them, the fact that Inyoung You has to live her whole life with a suspended sentence hanging over her head, with the label of a killer in her record, and most importantly, the pangs of conscience, is perhaps a more fitting punishment than sitting in jail for a few years and then being forgotten. They wanted to close the chapter of pain, wanted their son to rest in peace. In an emotional statement, the family said they did not seek revenge, but they sought justice and the truth. And the truth was exposed. Alexander was a victim of abuse, not a weak person who sought death on his own. The case of Alexander Urtula and Inyoung You became a powerful wake-up call regarding abuse in relationships, especially among the youth. It shattered the stereotype that only women can be victims and that only physical violence is worthy of condemnation. Men can also be victims of abuse, and mental violence is sometimes even more dangerous than a fist. Wounds on the body may heal, but scars on the soul caused by words can bleed for a lifetime, pushing people into a deep pit of despair. We often hear the saying, "Anger makes one lose wisdom," or "words are just wind." But in the age of technology, messages never fly away. They remain there, edged into the mind, becoming evidence of cruelty. Inyoung Yu's messages are the clearest proof of how toxic a relationship can escalate. It starts with love, shifts to control, then to abuse, and ends in death. It is a terrifying process that many are trapped in without knowing or daring to admit. Looking back at Alexander's radiant face in old photos, one's heart cannot help but ache. He had everything: intellect, family, a future. He stood at the threshold of the most brilliant successes, but it was all stripped away by a blind and toxic love. His story is a reminder to us all. Be wary of relationships that make you feel suffocated. True love never involves control, humiliation, or threats. Love is to lift each other up, not to drag each other down into the black mud. The case also raises the issue of the responsibility of those around us. Alexander's friends noticed abnormal signs, but they did not intervene strongly enough. They thought it was a private matter between two people. If someone had been more decisive, reported it to the school or police sooner, could the tragedy have been prevented? Silence and indifference are sometimes the very poison that aids the evildoer. We need to learn how to listen and observe, to reach out in time to save those flailing in the quagmire of psychological abuse. Inyoung You is now living a life under surveillance, carrying the sentence of the law and the judgment of society. But does she truly regret it? That is a question only she can answer. As for Alexander, he lies forever at the age of 22. His dreams and ambitions vanished with that fateful jump. The prestigious Boston College diploma was finally awarded to his parents, but it was heavy with sadness. It was a degree exchanged for a life, a testament to the cruelty of fate. The story of Alexander Urtula closes, but its echoes remain forever. It is an expensive lesson about the destructive power of words, about the fragile boundary between love and possession. In the darkness of text messages, a human being was killed slowly before his body even hit the ground. Never underestimate the danger of mental abuse. Cherish yourself and be brave enough to step out of toxic relationships before it is too late. Do not let yourself become a second Alexander. The night is deep, and today's detective story begs to close here. Hopefully, through this heartbreaking case, each of us will gain a deeper insight into life and the relationships around us. Stay alert, love the right way, and remember, no one has the right to hurt you, whether in the name of love or anything else. Thank you for listening, and see you again in the next mysterious cases, where the darkest secrets of the human heart will continue to be brought into the light. Good night, but don't forget to lock the door to your heart tight against manipulators.